sunny day. We're getting great days. I love this time of year. Now, I have spoken to you before, and so this is just beautiful. The way what seemed like a kind of almost a private thing amongst friends and in the community has really grown. You're on episode 59 is up there. I'm sure you've recorded a few more. Is it taking you by surprise that this has sort of taken such a hold?
Yeah, well, I started off. You were my second guest, number 2. Now I'm episode number 80,
Right.
and as expanded outside of Greystones, I've guests from London, from New York, from Dublin, from anywhere, Kerry, you name it.
Yeah.
And what it started off as a community idea, just to get a conversation going. It's still the same, so it's very much about topical conversations about community and what people do, why they do it, and their passion and how they interact with the community. So out of all that, then we ended up with so many guests and so many listeners, and the podcast is doing quite well. It's on the charts, and was in the top 10 charts just before Christmas. Which
Sweet. Now, what I think is possibly took you by surprise, and I'm delighted for the fact that taking to the stage in the Whale, you're starting on the 30th of January. You're going to do it once a month there. The first one sold out pretty quickly, and there's a waiting list of 45. I mean, did that sort of in any way pull a rug from underneath you and think,
very much so, because I was delighted when Ross McFarlane asked me to do the show, and I said, yeah, I'll give it a go, why not? But the idea again was to bring different people in the same room for the same reasons, and just have people interacting with one another, united by the podcast, whether they were guests or listeners. And I was taken by surprise that it sold out very quickly. We already announced the second one for the 27th of February.
Yes.
And that's going to be about do we really need another guru? So the idea is to see, do we need to do all this meditation, mindfulness, nutrition, ice baths and what have you? Do we really need to do all that? The whole idea of this live podcast is to have an open question. We're not going to give answers. Come down, listen to what we have to say. The panels are very strong with really interesting guests within that particular topic. And the idea is to open up the conversation, and that's very much the idea of the Social Fabric podcast. Open up a conversation, listen in, not judgmental. You can decide whether it's for you or not for you.
Well, I know early on when you kind of debuted the podcast, you said this is about rebuilding the fabric of society. And I mean, I don't know if there's a feeling that podcasts are enormously popular, and people thankfully are kind of listening to conversations, which is often the way to at least get into the grey area of life. Do you feel that there is you have sort of an optimism about having that kind of effect on society?
I do, and I tell you why, because it's not just an optimistic view, but the replies and the reviews and people that contacted me outside of the podcast to say what some of the conversation, how they changed, how they made some positive changes to their lives by simply listening to an open conversation, whether it was about street swimming, whether it was about physical abuse, or I've had people that were homeless on the podcast. So it's been all sorts of topics, and because it's like listening in to our conversation now, there's no judgment. I'm not interested in judging anybody. I'm not interested in making a point whether it's right or wrong who I'm talking to, but just leaving it out there, and it has been very positive. I've had guests that came back to me to say, look, after the conversation we do this and this and this and this has happened, I've now changed what I'm doing. I've had people coming to do my course or whatever it may be. So in a way, somebody mentioned it's the new Barbershop, the podcast. And I think it's a good way of putting it. It's just have a chat with somebody, that's what we're trying to do. Have a chat. Just, you might not change your mind, but you might go home and go, yeah, Paul had something, he had a point there.
Always do, I always do.
You always do, and in fairness, but the reason I started with you all those years, well, it was March 2018 when I started. You were my second guest, but the reason I started was because very much what you're doing is exactly the same thing. It's bringing the community together. It happens to be Greystones with you. I wanted to broaden it and just get outside of Greystones and see. And that's the beauty of the social media, that you can expand a little bit wider than Greystones alone.
Sure.
And what it's interesting now, there are people contacting me that want to be on the show because they have something to say and they feel I give them the space, I give them the time. There's no real time limit in around the 1 hour. But if anybody wants to talk a little bit longer, they can. There's no vetting as such.
And of course, the beauty of the internet is that it's freely available around the world, bar China and Washington, of course. But you're able to sort of kind of touch people who might just be on the other side of the world. There's a kind of universality about it. The one thing I do feel about the rise of the podcast, and I think it just reflects on the fact that we don't physically socialize the way we used to. That most people are at home at night, and understandably so. It's big tellies and very, very cheap booze, and everyone prefers to be in pajamas and having to dress up. I mean, do you I don't know if you kind of consider that as part of the reason that we need this, that there is a gap now in especially for men, just to sort of sit down and have these unforced kind of moments of general kind of discussion.
Very much so. And on the back of that, myself and a few of the friends here from Greystones, and there's 6 of us, where every year we go off and have a little run, somewhere in the mountains and have a chat. And so this year we say, instead of go away, we decided to run from Greystones to Galway in 3 days.
Wow.
But the idea of that is we want everybody to come out and join us for 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometers, whatever it may be. Just come out, have a chat, have a bit of crack. We do it for mental health, from specifically men's mental health, but it doesn't have to be men's. And the idea is exactly what you're saying. It's the fear of having a conversation sometimes. It's the fear of sitting down and do what we're doing now. You have a camera with you, but we can turn off the camera and carry on talking. And a lot of us don't do that. So I consider myself lucky to have a really good group of friends that I can have a conversation. I can have a laugh and I can tell them my worries and my problems, and we sort it out. So we said, okay, why don't we run from here to Galway, because it made sense. It was coast to coast. And then we said, well, let's bring as many people as long as possible, for as long as they want. Few of us, few of the guys will do the full thing.
Sure.
Anybody can commit to 1, 2 or 3 or 4 kilometers, whatever they want. And when we get to Galway, we have a little dip in the ocean and then have a couple of drinks.
I'll run down to the Burnaby with you.
You could do that. You can do that. And then, but that's so to follow on. I'm attaching to the social fabric thing because it's been. I met some wonderful people through the podcast, and I knew from the start everybody has a story, and there's always behind the persona. There's always a story behind, and we're in the perfect place here. The twins, the Flynn brothers, twins. They were on the podcast early on. I interviewed them separately because I've known them, as you do, a long time, and there's a lot more to them than just the handstand.
Do you know which one is Ant and which one is Deck? I can never be sure. There's a hair thing or something. There's a bit of hair sticking down for Ant.
There is something.
I can't remember if that's Deck or Ant, but whichever it is.
But yeah, so that's the perfect example of really nice guys that obviously have a marketing persona out there, and there's a lot more behind them. So so that's the run is called Mindful West Run. We're going to do it on the 2nd of April. But before that, we're going to do a couple of more. And in fact, the third live podcast will be all about venture races. And I'm going to have a guy that has just finished, will have finished Ross Thompson. He'll have just finished a 5-day expedition in the Arctic.
Wow.
And Jared Kennedy will be just back from Antarctica.
Wow.
I've been swam Antarctica, and then I'm in the process of finding somebody to run the equator. But then again, what I'm trying to do, come down, listen to these guys. You don't have to run the equator, you don't have to run Antarctica, but maybe you can go for a walk on the seafront, and that makes you feel a bit better.
Just to say, for a place of peace and tranquility and good health, that door is a bit of a whacker, isn't it? It's like, I think they must have just installed it so nobody falls asleep in the kitchen. That idea too, that the awareness of mental health issues has certainly risen, and there's a question mark over why it is that maybe it is just the awareness has risen and therefore it seems like there's more of an issue, or do you sort of in all your podcasts, I don't know if you've felt that there is a kind of a rise in people's mental health through the internet or whatever reason, the lack of social interaction?
From a lot of the people I spoke to, and I spoke to the CEO of A Lust for Life, and I spoke to, as I say, people that have been homeless and they've had all sorts. There seems to be a rise in it, and a lot of it has been attributed to social media. Now, I don't know if social media is a rabbit hole you can disappear into if you have social, if you have social issues in terms of interaction. I don't know. I wouldn't be qualified to. It seemed to be a scapegoat to say, well, social media drags us away from. And I suppose it's like anything. There's a lot more talking about it, so it seems to be a lot more prevalent.
The responsibility isn't there really. I mean, people say and do things online that they really wouldn't say to a person's face, or do in a house, together with a bunch of people is rare, unless they're very, very drunk, that they're going to take. And I think there's almost a want to go for the exclamation mark because you're going to be noticed.
No, absolutely. And then, for example, in the podcast, the live one we're doing on the 27th of February, we'll be talking about that. We're talking about the importance of the external gratification. So now, if you put a photograph on social media, you need to be externally gratified. You need to make sure that everybody likes you. We're a different generation. We're the worst generation because we grew up without it, and now we're a little bit old to deal with it.
Yes.
And so, in terms of teenagers, I'm still trying to work it out. They do really know what they're doing. Is it a problem? I'm not too sure, but it's definitely, there's no harm in having a chat. That's what all I'm trying to do.
And I think in 25, certainly 50 years' time, it'll be a different landscape. There will be a generation who have sort of basically figured out how this works and how it has a long-term effect, and all the good that's in there will be recognised, and hopefully quite a bit of the bad will be recognised at the same time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I look, as I say, all I'm trying to do, so there's a great story about all the crabs being washed out on the beach, and the little kid tried to throw them all back in, and the old man says, you're not going to save them all. And the kid said, well, I might save one of them, and that's really all I'm trying to do is, can we save one of ours? Can we?
He was a very hungry kid, though. I think he was ready to eat them all, really, I think, at that stage. But listen, well done. We'll put the links at the shows, and as we said, the first one has sold out at the end of January. There are February and March as well to look forward to. We'll put the links in there as well for those as they come up. But good work too. I know it's all about the fame and the money that you're in it for. But the side effect is that you're actually having some good on society. So well done.